Dear friends, let us begin this evening program with a short chanting in English. Please bow 3 times to the Buddha, either the one you have in your house or the one that you can see on the screen. To the Blessed One, the Lord who fully attained perfect enlightenment, to the teaching which he expounded so well, and to the Blessed One's disciples who have practiced well, to these the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, we render with offerings our rightful homage. It is well for us that the Blessed One, having attained liberation, still had compassion for later generations. May these simple offerings be accepted for our long-lasting benefit and for the happiness it gives us. The Lord, the perfectly enlightened and blessed One, I render homage to the Buddha, the Blessed One. The teachings, so completely explained by him, I bow to the Dhamma. The Blessed One's disciples, who have practiced well, I bow to the Sangha. Now let us pay preliminary homage to the Buddha. Homage to the blessed, noble, and perfectly enlightened One. Homage to the blessed, noble, and perfectly enlightened One. Homage to the blessed, noble, and perfectly enlightened One. We can sit together for a while in silent meditation. I won't give you guided meditation this time. We can just sit together in silence. And then after that, we have Dhamma discussion. Dear friends, the theme of today's Daylong has been the practices that we can rely on. I thought of this because in so many ways, the more profound teachings of the Buddha is sometimes like a koan, that when you think you've got it in terms of some concept or some other concept, the Buddha or the enlightened teachers are saying, no, that's not it. When you think that there's some practice or some belief or some method that you can hold on to, and this is really going to be the way to the end of suffering, and there's the answer is no. If you're clinging to it, it's not the way to the end. And it can cause a kind of a fear or a distress for the sincere practitioner, a feeling of not having a solid ground. If they understand this, but they don't also understand the gradual training path. This morning, when we spoke about the sila or the precepts, we emphasized that even at the beginning, that the precepts are offered in a negative way, things that we refrain from doing. So we refrain from killing, stealing, lying, using intoxicants, and so forth. If we think of the precepts in terms of doing good deeds and trying to come to the end of suffering by accumulating a great pile of good deeds, then we can never fill that bucket. We can never do enough good deeds to lead to awakening. But this opposite approach, this approach of purification, of letting go, of becoming free, of unwinding these habitual patterns and becoming free from those patterns, that's the pattern that leads us in the right direction. I also alluded this morning to the connection between loving kindness and virtue, in the sense that when we observe the precepts of good ethics, we're giving a wonderful gift to all the beings that we encounter. We're giving them the gift of safety, the gift of dignity, the gift of being respected, giving them comfort. And so in that way, we also are giving back to ourselves the same sense of safety, security, and comfort, that we're not going to be ripped off, we're not going to be tricked or fooled by a charlatan, we're not going to be violated in any kind of a way, as long as the practice of virtue is there. You could take it a little further or expand that a little bit and consider that the second point of the Noble Eightfold Path of right thought, or what's called sometimes right intention, is really the foundation of all of the precepts. Right intention is also expressed in terms of negative qualities, things that we do without, things that we are free from. So nekkhamma is often translated as renunciation, or sometimes it's translated as generosity. And it's said to be free from greed. There's in the Pali language, it's a pun, because kama means sensual greed or sensual desire, and nekkhamma is being freed from sensual desire. Then the second right intention is abhyapaja, which is being without ill will, being free from ill will, being free from irritability, discontent, dislike. Some modern translators explain it in terms of a positive value of loving kindness or something like that. But what's given in the Pali is actually just subtracting the defilement. And then the third one is called Avihinxa, which means non-harming. Sometimes it's translated as not cruelty, not having the intention to harm any being. And again, some teachers translate it as saying that it's compassion, free from cruelty. But we can think of this as it's a kind of it's a restraint that we have this naturally within the mind. When moral shame or moral dread is something that comes up very naturally, that if we are approaching doing like a wrong thing, something naturally comes up in us and we want to say, oh, stop. Or even I used to experience this very clearly back when I was much younger and I was in relationships. Sometimes I would be very frustrated and irritated with my partner, and I would be like internally on a kind of like a tirade saying, how can they do that? It's so terrible, it's so horrible, it's not all right, oh, they're, this and that, this and that. And then I would, when we, come home from work or come together or something like that, I would be face to face with my partner, the person who I cared about. And because I loved them, all of that internal storm of anger and irritability would just evaporate and be naturally replaced with this kindness, with this thought of non-harming, non-ill will. So we have these traits naturally, but if we develop them, cultivate them, make them strong, make them consistent, then that becomes the foundation. You almost don't need to have precepts if you develop the right intention to a really high level. Then why would you ever do anything that would violate the precepts? But the precepts are just there as a kind of a shortcut so that you don't have to ponder and think about it. Every time you decide to do something, you will just know internally, I don't kill, I don't lie, I don't do different kinds of misconduct. Then in the afternoon session today, we were talking about Samma Samadhi, or right meditation, and I was trying to develop the idea that there are many different, diverse, and skillful types of meditation, themes to contemplate in meditation, methods of meditation, And the great majority of the specific meditation techniques have the result of counteracting, dispelling, weakening, replacing, or counteracting the negative afflictions of the mind, in particular the five hindrances or other kinds of afflictive or depraved, corrupted qualities or habits of the mind that one can carry about. So we don't meditate in order to get something or in order to acquire something. Instead, we meditate for the purpose of letting go of something, the purpose of becoming free from something. And what do we want to become free from? It's the destructive habits of the mind and heart, the destructive psychological tendencies, you could say the underlying tendencies, or the destructive emotional habits that a person will have inherited from being a human being and being brought up in the usual way that most people are brought up. We all have a certain amount of these habits. So I suppose then this evening it will be useful to round it out by talking about panya, talking about wisdom. So then we talk about sila, samadhi, and panya in these three aspects of the Buddha's teaching. And with this common theme that even though like words, verbal language, and concepts is never a perfect representation of the truth. And we should not be clinging to concepts and words as if they were the final answer. If we did that, we would fall into one of the upakilesas, or one of the more higher level defilements of the mind, and that is the fault of views, holding on to the teachings in such a way that instead of becoming a ground for liberation, it becomes a ground for quarrels, a ground for pointing the finger at the other person and saying, you said first what you should have said second, you have it wrong, you've got it upside down, you're not understanding it correctly, I understand it correctly, and so on like that. These kind of quarrels and disputes that can happen. It's a special problem for in our, I guess, academic or intellectual fields. I think that people get into these kind of subtle points of a difference or a distinction. I think one of the teachers, maybe it's Ajahn Brahms, tells a joke about two Westerners who are hiking in Tibet or Nepal. They're on some kind of a trip, and they happen to meet one another, and they realize, oh, here's two Westerners of the same place, and they get in a conversation and find out, wow, they're both Americans. What a coincidence. And they found out, oh, they both came from the same state. And they find out that they both are Christians. And they find out that they're both Methodists. And they're thinking, oh, this is great. This is so wonderful. Finally, I meet somebody that has something in common. And then come to find out that one of them is a conservative Methodist, and the other one is a Reformed Methodist. And they say, "Oh, I'll forget you." So they use the subtlest distinctions to create somebody as an other, as to create a difference, to create a quarrel, to create a self, because you've got a self and another. So it's creating the danger of the ego and so forth like that. We see this in many different fields, but even in religion, it could be that it's more difficult to overcome than in other fields. And for that reason, the Buddha, in a way that is, maybe it's unique, but there's a very clear way that the Buddha counseled again and again not to take a hold of his teachings in a way that becomes the grounds for quarrels and disputes. If you're holding it that way, you got the wrong end. The other day, I got an email which led to a YouTube channel, which is exclusively dedicated, there's an entire YouTube channel dedicated to criticizing one particular esteemed meditation teacher. It's like the opposite of a fan page. It's a criticism page. And then after getting this email, I think we all got it, then I got another email from somebody who I'd never met before, was a Buddhist who got the same email and looked at the same YouTube page and said, "Well, is this really true?" And then they wrote and said, "Is it true? Is this teacher really that bad?" and so this is not what the Buddha taught. Nevertheless, it is true that the Buddhists very frequently spoke that when we get a hold of the fundamental teachings, we have a foothold in the Dhamma. We have security in the Dhamma. So when we understand the significance of the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, when we understand the Four Noble Truths, when we understand dependent origination, or at least, get some kind of, to whatever extent, we're able to integrate into our mentality, seeing everything in terms of dependent origination. To that extent, the Buddha said, you have a foothold in the Dhamma, you have a security. So you won't be swept away, and you won't sink when you have that kind of a foothold. I thought of speaking a little bit about the sutta, which is called the Relay Chariots. In this sutta, it's starting with a venerable monk who was very esteemed, called Punya Mantaniputta, a virtuous monk, one who educates, encourages, fires up, and inspires their spiritual companions. And Sariputta Venerable Sariputta thinks of questioning this monk, Punamantaniputta. So he goes to him. They sit together meditating overnight together. So they're practicing Samma Samadhi, sitting together in deep contemplation throughout the night. And then in the morning they have a polite conversation. And they say, Sariputta said, Reverend, is your spiritual life lived under the Buddha? Yes. Is it lived under the Buddha for the sake of purification of ethics? Certainly not. Is the spiritual life lived for the sake of purification of mind? Certainly not. Is the spiritual life lived under the Buddha for the sake of purification of view? Certainly not. Then is it lived for the sake of purification through overcoming doubt? Certainly not. Is it lived for the sake of the knowledge and vision of a variety of paths? Certainly not. Is it lived for the sake of purification of knowledge and vision of the practice? Certainly not. Is it lived for the sake of purification of knowledge and vision? Certainly not. Well then, what is the purpose of leading this spiritual life? And the answer is, the purpose is extinguishment or parinibbana by not grasping. Purification, the purpose of the spiritual life is parinibbana, the complete cooling down by not grasping. And then the sutta goes on, and this monk explains that all of these subsequent purifications, starting with ethics and culminating in the purification of knowledge and vision, that's the breakthrough of wisdom, the breakthrough of the opening of the Dhamma eye, seeing reality as it actually is. That these are like a series of relay chariots. If the king wants to visit a distant town, they would arrange to have 7 chariots ready at 7 different waypoints, villages along the way to that distant place. And the king would take the first chariot to the first waypoint and then get out and change to the second chariot and so forth, the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th. And so one by one in turn, they would be using the 7 chariots in order to reach the destination. So in the same way, we can use many things that are like not ultimate realities, things that are simple and basic, to provide the chariot that can carry us along the way until we reach the stage in our practice that we're able to undertake some further development, some further practice. In the another one of the suttas that we alluded to this morning was the what's called the Honey Ball Sutta or the Honey Cake Sutta, the Madhu Pindaka Sutta. And this is sort of like on my mind these days because the world has erupted into a state of conflict and violence, wherein not only do we see killing and destruction, but we also see a lot of other evils arising, like propaganda and a distortion of the truth, intentional lying, and so forth. And we can see how it's all arising from concerns about status, fear, loss of status, loss of position, loss of respect, or something like that, which is inflated to become, to be seen as such an existential crisis that one feels that, if the way that I'm treated and respected is punctured, and if I'm subjected to being defamed or humiliated in some way, that I will do anything to stop that from happening. And so it's because of this clinging to a rather naive, idea of who we are and what we stand for, what are the importance of our position, the importance of ego, and so forth, that humans fall into these conflicts. I'm just scrolling my notes there, so I want to read you a passage from this sutta. So it says that a person is beset by concepts of identity that emerge from the proliferation of perceptions. How this gets started. The sutta is like a drama in 3 acts. The Buddha gives a teaching that's very, very concise, and then he gives it a little bit more extended and elaborated, and then it's given at the end in a way that's fully developed in the detail. So how do we come to be beset by these concepts? And how can we be free from them? Dependent on the I informs, I consciousness arises. The meeting of the 3 is contact. So this is part of the cycle of dependent origination. We can recognize that. If we've studied dependent origination, if we've done that analytical meditation to try to slice and dice what we experience and notice these very fast elements, that are coming together. A person who doesn't know how to practice vipassana meditation will just experience it all as being like swimming in a soup. And everything is blended together, and they just know, I'm in pain, or they just know I'm upset, but they don't know how it came to be. But when we learn Vipassana, we learn how to look closely, look in detail to see how does this come about? How does it come to be? And then we can see and experience directly. For example, this is just using one of the senses. It could be any of the 6 senses. Depending on the eye informs, eye consciousness arises. The meaning of the 3 is contact. With contact as a condition, there is feeling. Now we come to the psychological part or the emotional part. What one feels, that one perceives. So the feeling and perception is linked together. There's a sort of a mutual two-way dependency, just as there's a two-way dependency between the materiality and mentality. There's another two-way dependency between feeling and perception. So if I have an unpleasant feeling, the mind looks around to try to find a story to justify and explain the unpleasant feeling. And so it will find something that's unsatisfactory, that's wrong, that is bad, that's not the way it should be, that needs to be fixed, needs to be changed. Or if I feel good, if I get a pleasant feeling, the mind may look about for a story of why I feel so pleasant, and I may look around with the rose-colored glasses and see things as being, or see people or circumstances as being, so wonderful, so great, so beautiful, so perfect. So the perception is colored by the feeling, but then it's also true that the feeling is colored by the perception. So if I think, in the past I had a bad experience with a dog and I'm frightened of dogs, and then I see, some kind of a creature and I think it's a dog, and then the feeling arises and the heart begins to beat and the hackles go up, the tension comes up, and the feeling, unpleasant feeling comes along because I thought it was a dog. But, maybe it wasn't a dog, it was a child or, something else. But it was the perception by itself caused the feeling. That's how they're coming together and synergizing together. From the feeling, what one feels, that one perceives. What one perceives, one thinks about. What one thinks about, that one mentally proliferates. And then with what one has mentally proliferated as the source, perceptions and notions born of mental proliferation beset a person with respect to past, future, and present forms cognizable through the eye. And then in another passage, it says, well, how can we get out of this? And we get out of it in exactly the same place that it arose in the first place. So we still have eyes, we still have consciousness, we still have objects, we still have contact, we still have feelings, we still have perceptions, and we still have thinking. But if in all of it, any part of it, any slice of this process that one is able to see and understand clearly, or the whole thing altogether, if we don't find anything there worth approving, welcoming, or getting attached to, in the source from which they arise. That's the end of the underlying tendency to desire, repulsion, views, doubt, conceit, the desire to be reborn, and ignorance. So this is a list of the some of the kilesas, some of the afflictions, some of the negative states that are not just, they can be related to emotional reactions or to like sensual pleasure or simple liking and disliking, but it's also coming to a higher level, to the level of conceit, to the level of clinging to existence, to having the desire to be reborn in a certain kind of existence, or to have a certain sense of being oppressed by existence and wanting to come to an end of existence, having these intellectual afflictions, being afflicted by our ideals. So we have built a kind of a thought world, an intellectual castle, and then we have to live in the space that we've created through our ideas. In the Dhamma, in the practice, we do think and ponder and reflect about ideas. We do hear ideas that are expressed in words. And we do, in a way, through that contemplation of ideas, program the mind so that within our practice of meditation, the deep states that we might experience in meditation when the emotional afflictions are disappeared and the mind is very clear, really calm, really able to experience reality in a very different way, so that we can see emerging from meditation that our conventional concept of who we are, our conventional concept of how reality is constructed and so forth. We can see that all those things are like they're not necessarily so. In day-to-day life, we may experience it a certain way, but on a longer meditation retreat, or if we gain deeper states of meditation, we may see things in a totally different way, and so we then don't cling to those conventions, those ideas anymore. And the Buddha encouraged us to use all of the training, the teaching of the Noble Path, the path of practice, and the central aspect of wisdom, to use them as a support and a standpoint, but having the understanding all along the way that we are going to let go of everything. It's all going to be released, all going to be abandoned. And so then, because of that, we don't need to set up a special YouTube channel merely for the purpose of criticizing somebody else. We don't need to be involved in quarrels and arguments And we don't need to be frightened and disappointed, even angry, when we see that the words and concepts that we encounter are not the ultimate reality or the ultimate truth that we can experience. There's another person that some of us met together a while back who he's become a wonderful example to me. This person was really suffering a lot because he'd gotten the idea that every concept is not true. Which is, okay, that's actually, that man had a point. That a concept is pointing to a truth, but the concept in and of itself is not the actual truth. The concept is a mental fabrication, and a mental fabrication is always diverting somewhat away from the actual reality. But he was so angry and upset that all the concepts in the Dhamma are not true, that everything that all the teachers say is not true. And so this was like causing a lot of distress. And so now we can see that even though we're going to release those things in the end, we can treat all of the basic ideas of the Dhamma as being like our relay chariot. And we can use those to develop our wisdom, to develop our insight, to develop the gradual layer by layer, peeling the onion, getting rid of the gross emotional defilements, the gross reactivity, the gross superstitious ideas, the magical thinking, the lazy thinking, and become more and more inwardly open-minded and contented, interested, curious, able to look at what we experience, whether what's going on within us is great or whether it's not so great, whether our understanding is good or our understanding is not so good, whether our emotions are the kind of emotions that support progress in the path, are the kind of emotions that are going the opposite direction. We can look at all of it or any part of it with a compassionate, interested desire to understand, to see how is this coming to be? What is this really like? What's really going on here? And in that way, the basic wisdom teachings, the Four Noble Truths, the three characteristics, everything in samsara are impermanent, unsatisfactory, and without self. The fundamental concept of dependent origination, of causation, because of this, that arises. And understanding the 12 steps of dependent origination and all of the various wealth of different insights that's taken in different segments of that teaching. Understanding the practices that are supportive of meditation in terms of knowing what the 5 hindrances are, knowing what the factors of awakening are, which can be tending to counteract and to give us some protection from hindrances, which can be unrelieving. Knowing what the indriyas are, what the faculties are, that is the factors of energy and samadhi, which balance each other out. You don't want to have too much, you want to have a balance of both those factors. And then the factors of faith and investigation, which are also balancing each other out. You can't go all the way on faith, and you can't go all the way on investigation without any faith. You need them both, and then mindfulness in the middle, which lets you know where you stand and what you need. So just within those few lists, if you can get a hold of them and use them as a structure to develop the practice, then you've got the stepping stools, you've got the secure foothold. You've got a strong ladder, or you've got a well-marked path. You don't have to go thrashing about through the wilderness or getting misdirected while you're climbing the mountain, finding that you've come to some place that's steep and impassable, where you're not able to go up and not able to go down and really trapped. Instead, you've got a path that's like well marked out, that's got the right kind of steps where you need to have steps, the right kind of handhold where you need to have a handhold, and which is clearly marked, so you know which way to go. This is the way that we use the wisdom teachings. We use the ideas of the Dhamma without disputing, without quarreling, and without any clinging, and seeing within these ideas, we're just observing what's arising, existing, and passing away, depending on causes and conditions. So this is my reflection about Panya. I hope I was not too rambling for you, but I'm really speaking more from the heart about it, not so much intellectual. With that, I bring this formal talk to its end.